Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Louis Retief with us today. He's an entrepreneur, co-founder of Hubly in expensive but beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. You can go check out myhubly.com. He's also on media. He writes stuff up in there and on LinkedIn, obviously. He's been running Hubly for 6 years now, and previously was employed at Wealthsimple. I guess that's where you got the idea, right, Louis?
Partly, yes. It's where I got my interest into the wealth management sector, which is, one of the sub verticals of Fintech. And that's where I got my feet wet into that sector.
And why did you get interested into that? Because I believe that most financial advisors are not so good, right? Wealthsimple is a nice solution for that. And most people don't know how to grow their money. So what gap did you see in the market there?
Yeah, so contrary to popular belief, Wealthsimple started off as a online investment manager, and their whole idea was to replace financial advisors, or to basically make a point that financial advisors are a large part useless. However, if you use Wealthsimple, they actually have a ton of human advisors that provide financial advice. Back in 2017 to about 2019, the fintech industry was going through an interesting phase where there was this whole notion that you could completely get rid of human financial advisors. And that just has not come true at all. They still large part manage the large majority of assets on the market versus robo-advisors. You rarely hear those terms anymore. And so I knew pretty early on that financial advisors will still have a future in however the industry is going to evolve. And so that's why I got interested in the wealth management vertical of fintech, primarily because I've always been obsessed with personal finance. I'm actually a huge personal finance geek. I can tell you about all the complicated workflows that I've set up for my personal finances if you're interested. And I probably was a financial advisor in another life. And so I've always had a deep empathy and respect for that career, but I knew they needed better tooling, better workflows, better automations to operate and scale their practices in order to compete with the evolutions of robo-advisors or online investment managers.
And do you feel you ever got an ROI out of all these tools that you set up for yourself? Like, is it like a nerdy thing that brings you joy, or did you really get a real ROI out of being such a geek with your own finances?
I'd say it's probably a little bit of both. One is it definitely has feeds a geeky part of me, but I think, and it has definitely not helped me save money. But what it has done, it's improved my decision making about my career and my life long term, and like how we're planning for different things. And I can give you a specific example of that, Charles. Is my fiance and I moved in together about 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. And as part of that, I made a move where, hey, we should consolidate our finances, because she was doing things one way, I was doing another thing. And I was like, let me get us set up. I use QuickBooks for all of our finance tracking. I use their small business account actually. And I have automated rules and coding set up for all of our transactions across our bank accounts and credit cards. And then I export all that data into probably way too complicated Excel to see how we're spending and trends and all of those things. Long story short, we were looking at the data after about 1.5 years, 2 years of living together, and we started thinking about family planning. We're in the process of trying to make a baby and all those things, and it became very obvious looking at our finances and our lifestyle and how we spend, save money, and our income that if she were to stop working for 3 months or 6 months to go on maternity leave, we would actually be in a little bit of cash flow trouble. And so, and that was because of the nature of her career. And so we actually pivoted pretty hard on her career, or at least the planning for her career. And she actually started her own business and moved more in that direction. And so that's just like one example of a very important life decision that was made based on the data from my geeky personal finance tracking.
Right. And I'm more on the extreme end of risk taking. I love adrenaline and sensations, bottom and top, So is that like a bad personality trait in the end? Because I think I can make like lots of money, large quantities of cash pretty quick, with that trait. And I can put myself into places that others wouldn't necessarily do it. I also outsource most of the boring stuff to AIs and automations. I do believe in that, and not having to look at it. But when I try to, yeah, like predict and put everything that I do on paper, it sort of cuts the magic, the mojo, and that sort of propels me as an entrepreneur. What do you think about that?
It's interesting, and I think there's a fine line between getting too into the details where it stifles creativity. I also do personally find that there is creativity that can be found in the detail. And as long as you don't look at it a lens from like, this is administrative or boring, but where's the opportunity in the detail, at least how I look at it. I can totally see how some people, and it's not for everyone, gets overwhelmed by the detail. I personally have a pretty strong skill set where I can dive really deep into the detail, but I can then pull myself back out to see the bigger picture of like the decision that needs to be made. But that ability to expand your brain or your consciousness is an important skill set to develop, I think, for anyone, let alone entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it depends on your personality type, but can you still grow your money somewhat passively? Shouldn't most focus on their money making capability and then check money saving and investing later on in their lives, or is that a myth?
I generally don't think you're going to save your way to being wealthy. I think it's impossible in today's world. And so you need to find other ways to build wealth. And generally speaking, building equity in a business is probably the best way that still exists to do it. Most countries right now just charge ridiculous income tax rates, where at least in Canada, your after income tax is already so low that to imagine that you're going to live a lifestyle in Canada and still save money beyond that is like an impossible dream, in my opinion. Now, if you move down to the specific states down in the US, there are high enough incomes and low enough taxes that there's an opportunity to probably save enough. But it really depends. That answer depends on, I think, where you live and likely the regulatory or governmental structures set up that will incentivize different types of behaviors, at least how I think about it.
And give us some numbers here. So it's like 35% taxes. Let's say that you and your wife make like 250K per year. The mortgage or the rent is at least 5K per year, which is like 60K, right? You have food and all these other expenses, transportation and all of that. What's left to spend after that?
Yeah, so once you're north of 250,000 in fat household or personal income, your marginal tax rate in British Columbia is actually 52%.
Oh
So,
my God.
so the government is taking more money than what you take home at the end of the day, which is like insane to think about. Now, yeah, your average, small 2-bedroom apartment, 1,200 square foot, which is basically what we live in. The rent is around 5,500 a month. And then you need to remember that incomes. I work for a US company, so it's less of an issue. But if we're a Canadian company, your income is depressed by about 30%. So not only in Canada are you paying 20 to 30% higher for things and your income tax is higher, but your salary and earning is actually lower as well.
So why the fuck does the government think it's a good idea to tax people 52%?
I have no idea. I ask them that every day.
Maybe most of them have never run a business in the first place, right?
Yeah, I think there's there's a point where I think government programs are really good, and I think Canada does a lot of good things. Like, we do have free
Like
healthcare.
taxing people.
Yeah, we're very good at taxing people. That is true. But I think it draws a certain type of individual to likely live in your country. Is how I potentially think about it. Like, uh, I large part look at a government. They're just another business, right? Their core customer is their taxpayer, right? And I like to think of it sometimes as like the way a software company thinks about it, right? Like, what is your average contract value for a taxpayer? How much are they going to pay you annually? Let's say you have a taxpayer who earns $200,000 a year. Their ACV annually is about $100,000. I then think about it, if a customer is paying you $100,000 as a SaaS company, you can actually do a lot for that customer. The depth of service and care you can give that individual is intense, right? And then I think about it, if I look at my ACV or my household's ACV of the government, like, am I getting that quality of service from my government? It's just another way to think about it. I struggle. It has reached a point where I don't think the value to the cost it makes sense. And I think that's the problem in terms of how the Canadian government is currently operating. And I'm hoping for change, is at least how I think about it.
It's almost impossible to give you that much value. They're not like technologically advanced enough, and I think it's so bureaucratic. It does, like, Canada is one of the best countries in the world, period, if not the best, right? And we're not. I think we sort of slowed down on immigration. I have an immigration lawyer friend up in Toronto. Shout out to Josh Skaknow. He's been quite upset with Trudeau's measure with immigration, which were sort of forced by Trump, because like people were getting into Canada to get into the US, right? But yeah, I think we're a great country. But when I compare it to here, I'm in Oaxaca in Mexico, and I mean you're from South Africa. You probably traveled somewhat extensively, right? Yeah, 100K, man, that is hard to get. Like, what do you have? Like a nice, very nice parks. You're close to everything. There's a bunch of companies, but these are not governments. Like these are companies that are providing values. You have nice roads. Okay, you're near Whistler. I mean, Vancouver is beautiful. The nature is beautiful there. So I'm guessing you're getting that, right? But here in Mexico, I also have nature. I have the beach 3 hours from here. The government doesn't do much for me here, but I'm not asking the government to do anything for me. I'm like very independent, right? Like I'll create my own fun. And yeah, there's nature everywhere in the world. Nature is not owned by, or shouldn't be owned by, anyone, right? And like I can just go out there and have similar experiences. So yeah, the 100K is very hard to justify.
It's very tough. Once you think about it like that, you're like, okay, if I move somewhere else, let's say I pay half of that in taxes, like, can I make up for that marginal increase in maybe change in lifestyle by making my own fund for $50,000 a year, right? Like, it's a fascinating, I like thinking about it that way. And it's how I'm like questioning my assumptions about where we should live and evaluating all of those things. And then there's the less qualitative or more qualitative pieces, like my family's here, my fiance's family here, like we have a community here, friends. And so like, how do you equate the value of those things is becomes a little bit more difficult, I would say. But if you're strictly looking at it on a balance sheet, that doesn't make sense.
Right. No, these are good points as well. And yeah, challenges that I faced in the past years as a nomad initially was like developing the community, right? The family and friends stuff, you sort of get used to it because you do FaceTimes every Sunday or something like that. But yeah, getting physical friends in a community is really, really important. Now, what about inflation in Canada? And yeah, the cost of real estate. I think there's like a housing crisis, they call it, in Vancouver. So what have you seen there? And you're probably like in the upper class. Have you seen that affect like a middle class or lower class people? These folks must be straight struggling, right?
They're straight struggling. Like, there is no new developments, or very few that happen up here. Pierre Polyev actually had a good piece that he did, where I'm just quoting the numbers that he provided. He did a study on looking at, like, which is what an average home costs here in Vancouver or Greater Vancouver, is about 3 to 4 million Canadian dollars. And he did some research and tried to figure out, looking at the average cost of like building a house, what percentage of that is actually going to the materials and the contractors, and what percentage of that is going to bureaucratic BS. And he basically found that about $1 million on average is going to bureaucratic processes,
Oh man.
or about 20 to 30% of the value of the house, or sorry, I should say the cost of the house, is going toward bureaucratic processes versus providing the contractor's money or actually building the house itself. And so I thought that was, I don't know how accurate that is, but he provided that on Jordan Peterson's podcast actually as like an assessment, and I thought that was like insane. And funny enough, at the same time I was listening to that podcast, my fiance and I, we just bought a commercial space. She's a therapist and a doctor, and so she started her own clinic. And we went through the process of purchasing a commercial real estate. It's about just shy of 1,000 square foot, and so it's not a big space at all. But the bureaucratic nonsense that we've had to go through just to get that space functioning has been insane. I'm like baffled by it. I can't imagine like building your own house or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's the opportunity that we see in GovTech and compliance tech, but you're sort of killing yourself if you're a founder doing that, because it's incredibly boring and frustrating, and it's even encouraging these systems, like I think yeah, we need like a change, a fundamental change in the how we elect our people, how we vote on multiple decisions, not just like who's going to be the leader, right? And have a better saying in these conversations on these systems that govern us and sometimes restrict us. And I think it's fair to say that entrepreneurs, founders are in charge of the economy and the well-being of this planet Earth. And if when you just overtax them, they have choice. They're very smart people. They're cunning individuals. So they'll just move to a place where doing business has lower barriers. I guess the extreme of that nowadays must be like probably Dubai, right? Like if you're really financially oriented, you're not so big on taxes, right? Like you'll go there. But I think we're seeing a bunch more like move to Mexico, which is somewhat near. It's a bit more liberal, right? Like less restrictions. So it's nice to be social as a country, but I think a bunch of countries sort of overdid it, right? Especially the older gens, which tend to stay in power for way too long and not open their mind too much.
Yeah, so many fascinating topics we can dive into there. There was I was listening to a podcast. I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was by Prof G. I'm assuming you know who Prof G is. He gave a pretty good analogy for how to think about the average young person nowadays, right? If you think back in the day, it was very common for the average young person, entrepreneur, nomad, whatever you want to call them. They would move to the big city, they would make money in the big city, and then they would move back to the small town.
Right.
Now, instead of thinking about it like that, nowadays, the way it actually works is instead of moving to the big city, you have people moving to the big country or the country where there is more opportunity for wealth building. And then they move back to the smaller country when they've made their wealth. And instead of thinking at on a city level, we're actually, because of just how easy travel is and all of those things, and assuming we have quality passports, like I have a Canadian passport, which I'm very grateful for. Not everyone has that opportunity where immigration is relatively easy given my career and stuff, but people that are smart or high functioning are just going to move because they're able to. The other piece that I think that you mentioned there that's quite fascinating is changing the electoral system. It was baffling to me going through we recently had an election up in Canada where we selected a new prime minister, and I was surprised. Even we had about 60% voter turnout, which is still quite low if you think about it.
Yeah.
But it is celebrated as high, and I was like, there's zero incentivization as a government even putting into where they're incentivizing people to vote, or let alone incentivizing people to watch the debate. And I was like, what would be a fantastic idea if government said, if you actively participate in the electoral process, you tune in and watch the debate, and there's some way of tracking this, and you also vote, you get a tax break, right? Like, wouldn't that be a great way to incentivize participation in the electoral process, and getting people bought into it? But they're not. You don't even care about that.
And yeah, the real question is why, isn't there like some smart entrepreneurial people like you and I that get into politics? I guess there are at the GovTech level, but I know some of these folks that were pretty smart in my high school classes that have got into politics, and really lively people that could have an impact. But I guess once you get in the system, you realize it's not what you thought it was, right? It's like, oh, so aspirational, world changing. You get in there, you understand it's bureaucratic, it's a machine. There are some customs that are very counterproductive, right? And you cannot really have an impact. There's a hierarchy which fucking sucks, you know.
Yeah.
You need to have this old ass manager that is not super flexible, and they're not like risk takers, right? Like they're like big corporations, right? Like in which it's mostly about maintaining what works, which is fair as well, right? Because you don't want to break society apart, you know, you don't want to have bridges falling and people dying. So they sort of do a good job at that, but they also need some kind of disruption, right? Like for the world to start getting better. I think they can get inspired by governments that move really fucking fast, like Saudi government, for example, with NEO and all of that. But I also think people need to think more entrepreneurially because AI is coming, and I think your own revolution starts with you, right? Like you can't go macro before going micro. Do you feel that AI is going to have a cataclysmic shift in the workforce and the market? Do you think it will make shit move faster?
I think without a doubt, what I try to do is I'm very try to be very observant about human behavior change, specifically in the workplace. I like obsess over watching myself work, if that makes sense. Like, is my behavior actually changing quite significantly because of the new technology, right? I'll give you an example. If we go back to blockchain or crypto, right? Like blockchain was going to revolutionize the workplace, and for a while there, if we go back a couple of years, right? But on a day-to-day, it never actually changed my work behavior. What I have noticed is AI has drastically changed my work behavior and how I'm interacting with tools and what I'm turning to, and what chat interface I'm interacting with, and how often I'm going to it for advice. And I've also noticed similar behavior changes in those people close to me, people I work with, and even my fiance. And so I'd say, because of that, I would say yes, there's going to be a continued big change in it and how people work.
Very interesting, Louis. Thank you for being on today. We should book a round two to talk a bit more about Hubly next time. Where can people find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, so they can find out and follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting on there and telling them a little bit more about Hubly. For those who don't know what Hubly does, Hubly is a workflow and process automation system purpose-built for wealth management firms. If you're familiar with tools like Asana or Trello or Monday.com, Hubly works very similarly. We are an operating system, but purpose-built for highly regulated financial advisory businesses. So find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a message, or visit our website at www.myhubly.com.
So that was Louis and Charles for